You find me once more parked on my drive, sat in my car, ready to talk about a film, as if that's normal behaviour. I mean, it's entirely normal for me, but not generally for other folk. I have been to see A Complete Unknown this evening, and if you are not aware, that is the new biopic from director and writer James Mangold, all about the early career of one Mr. Bob Dylan. Or one Mr. Robert Zimmerman, because that's his real name. This has been much publicised, and its star, Timothée Chalamet, has very much been doing the rounds, doing all the press, doing all the chat shows. So it's kind of been a little bit inescapable. And I feel like Timothée Chalamet has been a little bit inescapable for about the last 5 years now. And if I'm being completely honest, I think I was a little bit sniffy about him, a little bit dismissive. Maybe the way people of my age would have been about Leonardo DiCaprio in 97 when Titanic came out. It's really easy to go, he's just a pretty face, all the girls love him, that's why he's getting work. And that wasn't fair of Leonardo DiCaprio because he's a really good actor. It's certainly not fair to dismiss Timothée Chalamet as being a movie idol, a pretty face. He's all of those things, but what he is also is an incredibly gifted actor. He is absolutely superb as Bob Dylan in this film. And that's because he spent 5 years preparing for the role. And he has poured his heart and soul into it. Now, director James Mangold is also responsible for the Johnny Cash biopic, Walk the Line, which was out all the way back in, I think, 2005, which means it's 20 years old this year, which is mad because in my head it's not that old a film. And I absolutely loved Walk the Line. When I went to see it, I was not a Johnny Cash fan, and when I walked out, I absolutely was. And I feel like A Complete Unknown has done a very similar thing here, by really waking me up to just how supremely talented and interesting Bob Dylan is, or at least was, in the early part of his career. So, the film starts with a 19-year-old Bob arriving in New York. He's hitched there. He's heard that his musical icon, Woody Guthrie, is very ill in hospital, and he decides he wants to go and see him, pay him a visit, and just pays respects. And he manages to track him down, visits him in hospital, and while he's there, he meets a folk musician and all-round lovely guy called Pete Seeger, who is played by Edward Norton, who is also an actor that I hold in very high regard. Bob plays a song for Woody and Pete, and in that moment his fortunes change. He becomes involved with the folk music scene in New York, and this is where he will make his name. And we follow Bob from, I guess, 1961 through to 1965, the very early part of his career. There is no big dramatic arc like you might get with a musical biopic. I mean, thinking to the most recent one I saw, which was Robbie Williams' film Better Man, which is obviously a very different beast to this. But even comparing it to things like Walk the Line, for example, there's no arc in terms of, and then he got into drugs, or then he became a big drinker, then it all nearly went away. You're just watching this young guy become the Bob Dylan who became a musical icon. And it follows him from the time that he kind of first bursts into the folk music scene, where he meets Joan Baez, where he, like I say, he's friends with Pete Seeger. He meets all these musicians and influential people, and he starts to make his name. They want him to make an album of cover versions, but he's got original songs coming out of his pores. And it is ridiculous. Like, there's most scenes in the film, he's got a guitar in his hands, he's always noodling away, he's always writing a song, and like, you'll just hear him singing and playing, and you're like, oh, it's that one, oh, it's that song, I know that song as well, oh, now he's doing another concert, yep, I know that one, and I know that one. Hit after hit after hit. The songs that man is responsible for are like touchstones in that era of musical history, and he wrote every single one of them. He was writing songs that Joan Baez was taking. He was just this machine of creativity. And yeah, Timothée Chalamet, as I said, prepared over 5 years, worked with vocal coaches. He does all the singing in the film. He plays a guitar in the film. He plays the friggin' harmonica in the film. Now, having lived with a wonderful, wonderful father who was desperate to play the harmonica because he absolutely loved Stevie Wonder, and who, God love him, failed dismally to master the harmonica, I say hats off to Mr. Chalamet and his mad harmonica skills. Like, he's ridiculous. He's so good and he's so authentic, and he is just Bob Dylan. It's not just the curly hair and the nose, but it's the way he carries himself. It's his body language. It's just, he just looks so iconic, and you see that silhouette. You see that sort of profile, and you see, like I say, the curls and the sunglasses and the nose and the clothes, and you're like, well, that's just Bob Dylan. Like, he disappears inside that role so completely. He does, I think he performed something like over 40 Bob Dylan songs for the film, which is mad. An actress called Monica Barbaro, who I've only ever seen in Top Gun Maverick. She plays Joan Baez. She played and sang in the film. Her voice is beautiful. Johnny Cash, who I mentioned, who James Mangold did a biopic on, he makes an appearance, not with Joaquin Phoenix playing him this time, because that would be really jarring, and he was no longer the right age to play him. It was a guy called Boyd Holbrook. He plays and sings in the film. Edward Norton as Pete Seeger, does all of his own singing and plays the banjo. Like, it just makes you appreciate. I love seeing periods in musical history. I love seeing snapshots of a time. I absolutely loved Baz Luhrmann's Elvis film, and I'm not an Elvis fan. I love watching the genesis of an artist. It's one of the reasons why I loved Straight Outta Compton, despite not being a big hip-hop fan. I wasn't a big NWA fan. I'm not a massive hip-hop fan. I'm a white woman from the West End of Newcastle. I'm about as far from Compton as you can get. But watching the members of NWA meet, watching them be creative, amazing. Watching Bob Dylan come up with all of these classic songs with a cigarette sticking out of his mouth and a guitar in his hands, and just being skinny and iconic and curly haired and wearer of sunglasses and just cool. I think of Bob Dylan now, I don't think cool, but 1964 Bob Dylan is cool, man. He's really cool. And Timothée Chalamet just has that essence to carry him off. Edward Norton is adorable as Pete Seeger. I've heard him do Impress as well. Apparently, Pete Seeger passed away in 2014. Edward Norton said in all of his research he could not find a single person who'd ever encountered Pete Seeger who had a bad word to say about him. He was involved in this massive folk festival. He wanted to use folk music for good and for social change. And it's obviously quite a tempestuous period in American history with Bob's music soundtracking it. Like, I can't fault it. I have very little interest in Bob Dylan. My favourite Bob Dylan song, apart from like the obvious bangers, is a song called I'll get my words out in a minute, is a song called Things Have Changed from a film called Wonder Boys, starring Michael Douglas, Katie Holmes, Frances McDormand and Tobey Maguire. That nobody's seen but me. I'm sure other people have seen it, but there's a Bob Dylan song on that soundtrack, which I love. It is just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. If you're interested in Bob Dylan, if you're interested in this period of American history and musical history, if you just want to be wowed by, the fact that kid from June and Wonka can actually also be Bob Dylan, go and check it out. I could not have loved it more. Superb. Absolutely superb. That's it. Like, subscribe, share. Go and watch A Complete Unknown. I did, and I did not regret it. It was excellent. Thanks for watching. Katie out.